On behalf of Srila Prabhupada, I'd like to thank you all for coming to the Govardhan Puja ceremony. As we were singing, Jai Giri Varadhari. Giri Varadhari means the one who lifted the hill known as Govardhan. Srila Prabhupada was, as you know, in New York at the beginning of his preaching in the West. And he actually gave a lecture on Govardhan, the pastimes of Govardhan Hill, Krishna lifting the hill. He spoke about this in the first temple, 26 2nd Avenue. And 26 2nd Avenue. You can go there. There's still a temple at 26 2nd Avenue. 45 years ago, Prabhupada was speaking in the winter in New York in 1966. And he made a very straightforward presentation. This pastime, as you know, is about King Indra, who is in charge of the rain. And Prabhupada didn't maybe even take into account how the Westerners think about demigods. The Western experience of demigods, as we were speaking about this morning in the Bhagavatam class, in the West, people heard about the demigods maybe in their classes on ancient history. They think that the demigods are something associated with the ancient Greeks or the ancient Romans, and that it was given up in the course of the last 2,000 years as the thinking changed in the West, as the intellectual tradition did not hold on to the idea of demigods. So when Westerners hear about demigods, they sometimes think, well, the Hare Krishna people must adhere to a philosophy that is outdated But Prabhupada didn't take that into consideration. He just raised the question, how is nature controlled? According to the Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, nature is controlled by Krishna and the demigods. Krishna says he's in charge. Mayadyaksena Prakriti. And assisting him are the demigods. So there are actually some philosophical and you could say scientific issues connected with this pastime of Govardhan Hill. If we think about it, then we come up against these questions of who's in control of nature. Is it really true that Indra is in charge of the clouds? That the clouds are Indra's personal representatives? And that they're providing rainwater. And the rainwater is providing agricultural products to people. So people's happiness is coming from the food. Everybody's happy when they have food. Rain also brings cleanliness. These are some of the points discussed by Krishna and his father, Nanda Maharaj. Krishna, of course, is acting as a cowherd boy, and he's really the incarnation of God. For that time, he came to associate with his devotees on earth and to stop the disturbances created by the demonic. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyut anam dharmasya tada anam srijam. From time to time, Krishna descends at the request of the demigods so that the order in the universe is preserved. And Krishna takes the occasion to associate with his loving associates in Vrindavan. So Nanda Maharaj and the farmers were preparing a yajna, a sacrifice for Indra. They wanted to show gratitude to Indra for providing the rain. And Krishna came along and he acted like he didn't know what was going on. He was acting like a little boy. So he said, "My dear dad, please tell me, what is this sacrifice all about?" So Nanda Maharaj explained, Indra is the controller of the rain. And if we didn't have nice water coming from the sky, we wouldn't have fresh water to drink, we wouldn't have so many things. So the value of the rain, you can hardly estimate the value of the rain. And he said, we're not the only ones who do this, many other people also worship Indra. We offer him grains and other paraphernalia. The grains are actually produced by Indra through the rain. And he's discharging the rain, so let's offer him the sacrifice. In this way we'll accomplish several aims of life. We'll be religious, we'll have good economic development. Actually, in my town where I grew up, in Minnesota, in the United States, in the Christian Catholic Church, during the summer the farmers would sometimes pray for rain or for freedom from insects who could damage the crops. Sometimes insects came and then people got together in the church and they prayed to God, please stop this problem with the insects, or please make sure we have enough rain. So people throughout the world have usually done this, even in China. I was in China once, preaching in China, and there's a temple of heaven there, and it's the emperor's duty. The emperor of China used to have the duty of going and offering sacrifice to the king of heaven for rain, for good crops in China. So this is all over the world. So Nanda Maharaj is saying that other people also worship Indra. And this ensures that ultimately people get fed. That's one of the important results. So it's a sound tradition. Nanda Maharaj said. And Krishna disagreed. He didn't want the sacrifice to go on. He actually wanted to make Lord Indra angry. So Krishna, it's not that he was envious, but Indra is one of his servants. So it's getting a little crowded around the door. Make sure people come in so that other latecomers can come in. Don't sit by the door. Come and sit up front. Otherwise people can't come in. Thank you. So why did Krishna want Indra to become angry? Why did Krishna want to stop the sacrifice? Krishna was not just trying to insult him, but rather to, you could say, knock down a very great mountain of pride, false pride, that had arisen within the heart of Indra. Indra had become very puffed up, thinking actually that Krishna is just an ordinary, he thought Krishna is just an ordinary cowherd boy. He didn't see him as God. He was thinking the God that I worship is Vishnu. Vishnu is very regal, majestic. He has 4 arms. He lives with so many Vaikuntha associates. And how could this cowherd boy be my God, the God that I worship? It's not the same. And he stopped my sacrifice. So Indra became full of pride. The pride is compared by Sridhar Swami and other commentators to a big mountain in itself. He had a big mountain of pride, and Krishna wanted to knock that apart. So he thought, I'll make Indra angry. This will incite Indra to create disturbance, and then I'll deal with the disturbance and show Indra how much more powerful I am. Krishna, Krishna. So there's a description, there are 2 chapters of the Bhagavatam devoted to this pastime. In the first chapter, come in, there's room to sit here. Make room for her to sit. In the first chapter, the arguments that Krishna gives are given. The discussion that he had with his father is presented, and it's philosophical. I was thinking of presenting a little bit of it because I know that you are philosophically minded. You like to hear philosophy, and then we'll talk a little bit about the pastime. In the second chapter, the pastime of how Krishna lifted the hill is described. So I'll just touch on a few points to give you the idea of what Krishna said to his father to change his mind, to not do the sacrifice. He spoke of philosophy which is atheistic. So God himself, Krishna, as a little boy, was presenting atheism. He said the same thing that's expressed in the idea, as you sow, so shall you reap. The Bible says that. What you do now will determine what happens to you in the future, and what you've done in the past has determined what is happening to you now. So there's a belief in reincarnation here. But there's no idea of God included in this philosophy. It's called Karmavad, or Karma Mimamsa. It's one of the 6 main schools of Vedic philosophy. So because, Krishna is actually God himself, so there's no question that he seriously believed this atheistic philosophy, but he presented it seriously, even though it's a mediocre philosophy, just to tease his father and his father's friends, who were his pure devotees. He didn't want his pure devotees to do a yajna to the demigod Indra. For someone who's engaged in pure devotional service to Krishna, sacrifices to the demigods are not necessary. So Krishna was thinking, why are my eternal associates, who are now appearing as my father and other relatives, why are they caught up in this idea of worshipping Indra? So he wanted to remind his eternal associates, you don't have to do this. So what he argued was that unless we just do our work, we won't get any results. We have to work in the proper way, then we'll get results. If we do our farming, then there'll be rain automatically, because the laws of nature are set up this way. And it doesn't really have anything to do with Indra. He has to act in a certain way if we act in a certain way. Another example can be given to illustrate this. A student in the university has to take an examination. And unless he does that, he won't get the result. He won't get his certificate or whatever. And the person who gives the examination, the examiner, he doesn't really have anything to do with that. He just gives the exam, the student takes it. If the student were to try to please the examiner or bribe the examiner and say, give him a present, and say, I want you to make sure that I do this exam, I get a good result. That isn't the proper thing to do. The examiner just turns in the papers and gives the exam. He doesn't get involved that way. So similarly, the people don't have to offer, they don't have to offer sacrifices to the demigods. Krishna is saying, according to this philosophy, this atheistic philosophy, if they just take the exam, they'll get the result. If they do their work, that's sufficient to pay the tax to the demigod, you could say. People who do the demigod sacrifices, they want to pay some tribute or pay some homage or offer respect or give thanks to the demigod for the results that are bestowed upon them. But actually that's not required. All they have to do is do their ordinary work. And the demigods are dependent on that. They won't bestow the result unless the people do their work. So this is Krishna's idea that he's telling his father. When Prabhupada was speaking on this pastime in New York 45 years ago, he actually was going through these verses. He was reading these Bhagavatam verses in English to the people in New York at 26 2nd Avenue. He read about 10 or 11 or 12 of these verses. Krishna makes the argument in about 12 or 15 verses. And Prabhupada was reading these to people and then commenting briefly on these ideas. So he was presenting this whole pastime to people in New York 45 years ago. So Krishna says, therefore one should seriously worship work itself. If you want to worship something, worship the work that you do. And this has developed into a deviant philosophy that people follow in India now. They say, work is worship. And Prabhupada condemned this. He said, this is not worship. It's atheism. If you don't recognize God, then it's atheism. But Krishna was presenting this absurd philosophy, saying that what we should do is just worship our work. And he said, how are we working? We're working as farmers, and we're protecting cows, we're doing some commerce, we do a little bit of money lending. So as a community, cow protection is very important. And Govardhan Hill is providing grass to the cows and streams of water that the cows can drink. So why don't we worship Govardhan Hill? Rain is caused by nature. It's just at a certain point, things get hot, the sun heats up the atmosphere, and then the water is condensed, it goes up and forms clouds and comes down as rain. So it's just happening that way. We don't have to worry about Indra. And Krishna said, my dear father, our home is not in the cities or even the towns or the villages. We're actually living in the forest and on the hills. Therefore, let's make a sacrifice for the pleasure of the cows and the Brahmins and Govardhan Hill. With all the paraphernalia that's collected for this Indra Yagya, and let's perform this sacrifice instead. So he was able to persuade the local people to do this. They were quite affectionate toward Krishna. They were all absorbed in love of Krishna. And they just accepted, yes, Krishna wants that. Okay, sounds okay to us. Good idea. Let's do it. And they weren't too much afraid. What will happen if Indra doesn't get it, the sacrifice? A little bit they were afraid, but not so much afraid that they thought, oh, we cannot accept Krishna's plan, we have to do that, yagya. No, they accepted Krishna's protection, Krishna's plan. And ultimately Krishna protected them completely. So it was a nice time. All of a sudden they thought about how to make this festival. Krishna said, let's make many different kinds of food, cook many things, and the Brahmins who know the Vedic mantras can light some fires, and we'll feed the priests, we'll feed the cows, we'll distribute food to everyone, even the dogs, and we'll give grass to the cows, and when everyone has eaten to his satisfaction, then we'll get all dressed up and we'll circumambulate Govardhan Hill. We'll go on a procession around Govardhan. So you can do this today yourself if you go to India and you go to Vrindavan. You can manage, take a car, go to Govardhan. Govardhan's a big hill. It's long, it's shaped, and very long, and very thin, not very wide. So you go down one side and then you come back up the other side. It takes about 6 hours. And many people circumambulate Govardhan Hill nowadays. Many devotees do this. So Krishna said, okay, that's my idea. I hope it appeals to you, and then you'll do the sacrifice. So that was the end of his arguments. And these arguments were accepted as proper by Nanda Maharaj and the other men. So they all did as he suggested. And then they went on circumambulating the hill. And at one point, they made an offering of food. Okay, it's getting crowded again by the door. Too many people are sitting by the door. People can't come in, so come and sit up front. Don't sit there. Just get up and sit up front, please. Thank you. So when they offered all the food that had been cooked to Govardhan, Krishna bowed down himself, he bowed down to the hill, and he actually assumed a huge form to give the cowherd men faith. A form appeared, like a human-like form appeared, but gigantic. And this was the personification of Govardhan Hill. This form declared, I am Govardhan Mountain. And he began to eat the offerings that the people had presented. So you can imagine how astonished you might be if say this mountain across the lake, one day it assumed a gigantic form, and the TV news cameras would come and say something happened in Zürich today that was very unusual. This hill assumed a gigantic form. But that's actually what happened. So it's quite extraordinary, and this is characteristic of Krishna's pastimes, that he can do something extraordinary that ordinarily doesn't happen. Do something supernatural. But this was important because it established that Krishna is identical to the hill. And nowadays, people respect this idea that Krishna is identical with Govardhan Hill. Therefore, what do? They go to Govardhan and they take stones, little stones from Govardhan, and they worship them exactly as they worship the deity of Krishna in the temple. Today, earlier, we saw the Abhishek to Govardhan Shilas, these little stones from Govardhan. We bathe the Shilas and we dress the Shilas, give them offerings of food. So this started a tradition of worship, Krishna worship. So we're actually worshiping this form that Krishna assumed, the gigantic, super big form that said, I am Govardhan Mountain. This is what we worship when we worship Govardhan Shiva. And Krishna was just playing the part of an ordinary boy in the village, so he said to the people, wow, see how this hill has appeared in person. And he's bestowed mercy on us by accepting our offerings. So he led the residents of Vrindavan in bowing down to this incarnation of Govardhan Hill. And this was all in keeping with the festival. There was a big festival going on, and the atmosphere was already up. People were in a good mood. They were joyous. They were celebrating, and this gigantic form of Govardhan really made the festival a success. Then they returned to their village. And I'll read a little bit now what happened, description of what happened. Lord Indra was overcome by anger when he saw that the residents of Vrindavan cancelled his sacrifice. He tried to punish them by sending a devastating rainfall to Vrindavan. But Krishna protected Gokula by lifting Govardhan Hill for 7 days and using it as an umbrella to ward off the rain. People went under the hill. Indra was so angry that the sacrifice meant for him was disrupted. And he was falsely presuming himself to be the supreme controller. You know, he was thinking he was very important. He was in control of an important element, water. So he thought, these coward men have become intoxicated by their pride. They imagine that they can worship Govardhan and they can neglect my sacrifice. They've offended me by taking shelter of an ignorant child, Krishna. So Indra was thinking the residents of Vrindavan were proud, and Krishna was thinking Indra's proud. So there's a lot of pride spoken about in this pastime. To remove the supposed pride of the residents of Vrindavan, Vrindavan, Indra sent the clouds, known as Samvartaka. Their function is to facilitate the destruction of the world at the time when the universe ends. The Samvartaka clouds play a role. They come along and help to destroy the universe. So they're very powerful clouds. Once when I was living in New York at the temple in early 1970s, we put on a play about the Govardhan Hill. And one of my roles was I was playing a Samvartaka cloud in the play. So this is the time when we came on stage, and Indra sent these clouds to harass the Brajvasis. Great downpours of rain and hail, and the cowherd community felt very disturbed. Krishna was actually thinking, if I killed a few cows, it's no problem. I can even kill some of the cows. He was so intoxicated by pride that he didn't even think, that this would be a terrible, terrible thing to do. So naturally Krishna was angry and he wanted to smash Indra's false prestige. So he lifted the Govardhan Hill with one hand, actually the left hand, and invited the cowherd community to take shelter in a dry space. And for 7 successive days he held up the hill. By his energy, he made his energy work in such a way that the ground absorbed the water. There wasn't a flood. It didn't flood because he made a special arrangement that the earth could absorb more and more and more and more water. So he just completely disrupted Indra's plan. And Govardhan Hill was feeling the thunderbolts, and the Govardhan Hill was taking pleasure in the thunderbolts striking, and how he was giving protection. And so finally, Indra understood that Krishna's mystic potency is more powerful than my power. And so he ordered the clouds to withdraw. So then the 7 days rainfall stopped, and the villagers emerged from beneath the mountain, and Krishna put Govardhan Hill back in its place. So the cowherd people were all in ecstasy. They were so happy. They had seen Krishna for 7 days and nights continuously. And they went through a lot of emotional exchanges, wondering whether Krishna was going to be able to continue to hold up the hill, whether he would get too tired. How could he do it? Just a small child, showing this ability to hold up the hill. So they all embraced Krishna. They were so happy. And the demigods, again the demigods, appeared in the heavens, and they showered flowers. Okay, so let's stop there. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. All glories to Giri Govardhan.